Hi everyone, welcome back. It's Heather from MCI Designs, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about a very basic equipment list for acrylic pouring. Now, when you start in acrylic pouring, you don't have to break the bank. Your biggest expenses are really going to be your paint and whatever you're going to use for your pouring medium and your substrate, which is whatever you're going to be painting on. So first things to consider is the type of paint you want to use. You can go with a student grade acrylic paint, or you can go with a craft paint. You can go with an artist quality paint like Golden or Liquitex or Chroma acrylics or something like that. But it really depends on how much you want to spend. The artist quality paints are of a higher quality. You have better pigments, you have a greater pigment load in your paints. But the craft paints work really well if you're just getting started and you're not too worried about it, hanging in the National Gallery. So pick your paint, pick your medium. I've done a separate video talking a little bit about medium, so you might want to check that out, and the paint to medium ratios. So once you've got those kinds of things, the basic equipment that you're going to need to get started with acrylic pouring is something to paint on. So this is a value pack canvas from Michaels. They come in packs of like 8 or 10, kind of depending on what size. They're pretty inexpensive. They're decent quality for what you get, and they're great to practice on. You also have other options if you don't want to work on canvas. You can paint on ceramic tiles, something like this one. You can get these really inexpensively, like a few cents each, at your local hardware store like Home Depot or Rona, Lowe's, whatever. They all have these in different sizes and shapes. So these are great. You can paint on these. If you want, you can paint on these little panels, these little canvas panels, and it's a little board. So it's cardboard on the back. My only suggestion with these is be very careful. These will tend to warp because the paint is wet and this is just a cardboard base. As it dries, it will curl. So the edges will curl up and then your paint design will all flow into the middle. So what a lot of people do is they will wet the back before they pour it, or they will seal the back with something called Kilz, K-I-L-Z, primer, and that tends to help it not warp. But I tried a couple of these and I did not like it because I got a couple of really cute ones, and then as it dried, the sides curled up and it ruined it. So anyway, if you want to, give it a whirl, but just fair warning, they can curl. There's lots of great YouTube videos out there on people with suggestions for how to keep them from curling. So you might want to check those out. So that's an option. You can also pour on a wood panel. So these ones here, I actually just got them at Dollarama. Now, it's not fabulous. It has to be sanded first because it's not super like artist quality, but you get the idea. It's a wood panel. Sand the top. You're going to seal it with something. Generally, I like to use a mixture of Golden's GAC 100 mixed 50-50 with distilled water, and then I just brush that on and let it dry, and that's a good sealant for it. And then you want to prime it with the artist gesso, and then you're ready to go. And you usually do 3 coats of gesso, sand between coats to make it nice and smooth. But this is also an option if you like pouring on wood panels. But by and large, the easiest, quickest, and cheapest option is, well, one of your cheapest options is probably just the little canvas panels that you can buy at your local art store. So next, what you might want to invest in is you want to save your table. So first and foremost, your table surface, you'll want to get a plastic drop cloth, something like this. Just cover your surface as much as you try to be careful. Paint splatters, paint spills. I've knocked paint over. I was squeezing some out of a bottle the other night and the top exploded and it went all across the room. I've still got it all over the side of my furnace down here. So anyway, be careful. Plastic drop sheets, really handy, very cheap. So don't worry about that. It's not too expensive. The next thing is you want to have something that you can pour on. Now I like, for working at home, just using these oven liners. You can buy these at the dollar store in a 2-pack, and they're just the aluminum oven liners that you put in the bottom of your stove. These work great. And the nice thing is, although they're not super like sturdy, like I wouldn't try putting anything really super heavy on it, and you got to support it underneath, but at least you can pick your stuff up and move it if you want to clear off your table, right? And rather than get it all gunky, I like to reuse. So I will put down a layer of parchment paper. Now the parchment paper that I get, I generally buy at Dollar Tree, dollar store. This stuff is great. It's a 25-foot roll, and it's like $1.25. So I've got like a dozen boxes of these sitting and ready to go, and they're great. And you may also have some parchment paper at home already in your kitchen. So this stuff makes a great surface for putting underneath your painting, and it's easy when you're all done. Crumple it up, throw it away, and then you don't have to worry about cleaning off or peeling off dried paint on your metal tray. So that's a great option. However, some people like to save some of the paint that drips off the sides of their paintings. And if you do, use something like a freezer paper. So this is freezer paper that I get at my local grocery store. It's got one shiny side and a dull side. You put the shiny side up, and it's nice and glossy. So when your paint dries, you can just peel it right off, and it comes off like a dream. So you can use the peeled off layers of the paint that runs off of your canvas for making jewelry or cards or whatever you like if you want to save the paint. So the next step is you're going to want to have some push pins. So most everybody's got some push pins kicking around their house, in their kitchen or their office. These are great because you put them in the back of your canvas, and it keeps your canvas elevated off of the surface. So as you're tipping and tilting and moving the paint around, it's going to run off the sides and catch on your parchment paper or your freezer paper. But when you go to put it back down, you've got the pins to keep it elevated off the surface, so your painting doesn't stick to the surface, and you have the ability to get your fingers underneath it, to lift it, move it, tip it, tilt it, that sort of thing. So it keeps it elevated, and it also allows for airflow to go underneath and on top to help when your painting is drying, so that you don't get uneven drying. So the push pins are really super handy. I just keep a little tin full of them here, one of my little plastic paint containers, and I reuse the same ones over and over and over again. So you don't ever have to worry about, one little tiny box from the dollar store, if you don't already have them, will cost you, a couple of cents, and they're super handy. If you prefer something a little more substantial for supporting your artwork as you're painting, you can use these little painter's triangles. You can buy these at your local hardware store like Rona or Home Depot or whatever. The thing with these ones is, as much as they're effective in that the only portion of the support that touches the painting is just the tip of the triangle. So you can have your back painted or whatever, and you don't have to worry about this interrupting a design that flows over onto the back. You got to be real careful with the placement, and you got to have it set exactly right so that it sits on the edge. Otherwise, you're going to have to keep moving them around. So the nice benefit with the pins on the back instead is that your support is built right onto the back of your canvas, so you can put it anywhere you like. So if you've got a spot that you want to move it to, you can just pick it up without having to rearrange the supports underneath it every time you move it. So anyway, that's just an option. One other option, it's one thing that I like to save, is applesauce containers that you buy for like kids' lunches or your own lunch. These ones I save and wash them out, and if you want to use the little plastic containers, they also make a great support for putting underneath a painting. So these are handy. They don't have lids, so I wouldn't use them for storing paint or anything like that, but they're good for support. So once you've got your substrate, you've got your little table set up with your nice clean area, and you're ready to start painting, some of the other supplies that you are going to need is something to put your paint in. So most times I use cups. So when I started acrylic pouring, I started with basically using like flip cups and dirty pours and that sort of thing. So a good plastic cup is always a good piece of equipment to have. Now I get these at my local dollar store. There's something you should be aware of though. When you go to buy these types of plastic cups, look at them carefully, because these ones are the nice clear plastic, and when you feel the inside, it's actually nice and smooth. It's nice and smooth. It's got a really nice finish on it, that it's not rough at all. Whereas some of the plastic cups you can find at the dollar store are almost like a milkier kind of color. And I find that the paint really sticks on the insides of those, and it's hard to clean out. Now, I don't like wasting or throwing a lot of plastics into the landfill. So what I will do is, when I have used a painting cup, like this one's got dirtied and it's dried paint on the inside, instead of throwing this away, what I do is I have a bucket beside my workstation, and when it's dry, I'll toss it into the bucket. And when the bucket's full, I'll fill it with hot soapy water and let them soak. And when you let them soak and it's that nice, clean, smooth plastic, the paint will just slough right off, and you can literally just wipe it out with your finger. So then you can get all the solids out of your paint cup, wash it out with soap, and then you've got a nice clean cup. Then you can strain all the paint solids that came out of your cup, out of the bucket of water, and throw the solids into the garbage, and then you can pour the water out without having to worry about putting all of those plastics and acrylic paints down your drain, which is very, very bad for your drain. I'll just say very bad. Okay, so if you've got cups, these are the nice ones that you can get. You can get them in a variety of different sizes. They usually come in a big pack, so you get like 20 or so. If you're doing larger paint pours, here's a nice cheap alternative, is getting the plastic cup from your beverage that you get at Starbucks or various other places. These ones are great. The same kind of nice glossy plastic material, and you can get them in a variety of sizes. So you buy the drink, you get the cup for free. So you can take it home, wash it out, and reuse it. So I have a lot of these little things like this that you can reuse. Now, if you're mixing paint and you want larger quantities and you want to be able to save it, like say you do a lot of paintings with white negative space or black negative space, use an old yogurt container. They've got a nice lid that sits right on there. They're perfect for storing paint or mixing paint as well. So this is another nice free alternative. You don't have to go out and buy expensive plastic containers. You can just use what you have sitting around the house that would just go in the recycling anyway. So you can use stuff like this. You can use like a French onion dip one that I've got kicking around. You can store paint in that. So all these kinds of things are great, inexpensive alternatives that you can use in your basic equipment list. If you do want to spend the money, you can go to places like a paint store. This is from Cloverdale Paints. This is a mixing cup designed for paint, and it's got all the little measurement quantities on the outside, so you can do more exact measurements. These are great. They also come with lids, but it depends on how much you want to spend. The other ones, they're pretty good just for free, but that's an option as well. One of the ones that I picked up recently are these little cups, and I love these. I ordered them off Amazon.com, and they're little 5-ounce cups, but they have this lovely little lid, which is great. So you can store your paints in here, pop the lid on, and it's nice and fresh to use the next time you want to use that color. They hold up really well. They wash out really well. They're still that nice glossy clear plastic. So it just soaks off and they're good as new. So I use and reuse those. So those are great. And if you have a little bit of paint that you really don't want to throw away and you figure you might use it again, you can get the little teeny tiny ones. And these I find at my local dollar store, and they work great. I use these for paint and for my little push pins, that sort of thing. One other thing you might want to consider having also is some disposable cups. I get these little Dixie cups at, you can get them at Walmart, you can get them at the dollar store, and they're great because you can just pinch the edge to make a nice pouring. If you want to do like a little mini tree ring pour, I did a bunch of acrylic poured Christmas ornaments, and I used a bunch of these over the holidays making those, and they're great if you just have a small quantity of paint and you want to do a little mini tree ring pour. It works great as the little spout, and then when you're done you can just throw it in the garbage or recycling. One other thing that you can also do is if you want a more flexible lip so that you can control how the paint flows out of the cup, you can just take one of these cups and cut the rim off the top, and what you're left with is a nice flexible cup. I haven't found that I use that all that much. It's an option, but I find I use the paper cups more, or a measuring cup. So everybody's got measuring cups in their house. You can use glass, you can use plastic. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using one that you've used on paint back in your kitchen for food, but you know, measuring cups are pretty inexpensive, so you can pick one up fairly cheap, and with the little spout you can do the tree ring pour or anything like that quite easily and quickly with something that you may already have in your house. I have a measuring cup. It's a bigger one that I dropped the other day, and I broke the handle off, and so as soon as that happened it became a painting cup. So that one's waiting in the wings. Okay, so that kind of covers the cups and the plastic containers that you're going to need for your paint. Another thing that you might want to consider is squeeze bottles. So I've got a couple of different squeeze bottles that I like to use. I have some fairly inexpensive ones like these. You can get these at the dollar store for about $1 a piece, and they're great. This one I use for a mixture of distilled water with a little bit of Floetrol in it for thinning paint. So when I'm mixing up my paint, if I find that it's a little bit too thick, I'll take a little squirt out of this squirt bottle to add a little bit of water and mix it in. So that's handy to keep around. Also, if you have a painting project where you want a little more precision to be able to lay the paint down in a steady stream, squirt bottles are great. My only suggestion with the squirt bottles is make sure you get one that has really nice threads. If you've got a really crappy, cheapo squirt bottle and you squeeze it too hard, it's going to leak and icky mess. These ones I got at a local kitchen restaurant supply store, and they weren't really all that expensive. It was less than $20 for a box of 12. So it's not much more than buying like the cheapo ones from the dollar store, and it's a better quality bottle. Plus, A, it holds more, and B, it has good threads and a nice wide mouth. So when you look at this, you can actually take it and mix right in the bottle. So you don't have to worry about a little tiny narrow opening. You can get in there, you can stir it, you can mix it, and they're great bottles. They're really multifunctional. So I tend to keep colors that I use a lot in the squirt bottles, and they're easy to fill. So you can do it. I have some for black and for white and for some of the primaries, that sort of thing. So these are super handy to have. You can also get squirt bottles in smaller sizes. I really like these that have the twist top, so you can open and close it kind of like a glue bottle. You can control how much comes out, so if you're doing finer detail, adding color, or you can use it to store silicone oil, you can use it to store alcohol, anything like that for any of your liquid supplies. So these are super handy, and I think this came from the dollar store in a 2-pack for $1.25, so they're really inexpensive. Another thing that you're going to find at the dollar store is stir sticks. So you have a couple of different options. As far as I'm concerned, when I'm stirring paint, I like to use this style. So this is a little bigger than a popsicle stick. It's a little bit fatter and a little bit longer than a popsicle stick, but it's got a nice flat, broad surface, which really moves the paint around well. Now I find with the thinner popsicle sticks, you get more air in your paint when you're using it. And same with chopsticks. A lot of people will save their Chinese food chopsticks and use those for stirring paint. And I find it's the same thing. You don't get as good mixing. It takes longer. You end up with more air in your paint, which is not good. So these, not so much. But these ones are great. These are what I typically use for most of my paint mixing. And for the taller, like the bottles, this size popsicle stick doesn't fit. Like, you got to get your hand way in there. But these ones are a little longer and they work great. So you can get them in different sizes at your local dollar store. Really inexpensive. It doesn't cost a lot to get started with these kinds of supplies. And they work great. And the nice thing is you can reuse them. I usually take the popsicle stick, and when I'm done, I'll take a piece of paper towel and I'll just wipe it off. And then I'll set this on a piece of parchment paper to dry. And then once it's dry, I'll reuse it over and over and over again. So I bought one bag of these when I first started. And that was over a year ago, and I'm still using the same sticks. So less waste is always a good thing. So reuse, recycle whenever you can. Another thing you might want to keep on hand that most people probably already have in their home is some painter's tape. Now, the painting tape is handy if you want to keep the back of your canvas or your painting substrate nice and clean. So sometimes people will take the painter's tape and put it all around the four sides of the back of the canvas, flush to the edge, and then put their pins in. And that will just keep all the paint that runs off the top of your canvas and down the side from pooling on the bottom, because some people like to keep it nice and clean, or they'll paint it afterwards in a solid color, but they don't want anything showing through. So it keeps it nice and tidy, and when you're done, painting is dry, you just peel it off and throw it in the garbage. So painter's tape comes in quite handy. It's also good for holding stuff down on your surface. If you're painting on plastic like I am, I've got a piece of parchment paper underneath my metal tray here, mostly just because I've got glare from a light here for the video, but it can be handy for holding things down as well if you need to tape stuff down. Another kind of basic safety supply that you should really think about having on hand is gloves. Now, most of the craft paints that you'll buy at, you can get really cheap at the dollar store or at your local craft store. Most of the pigments in them, they say they're non-toxic, but some pigments, especially in the artist quality paints, like anything that has cadmium in it, the paint itself, the pigments can be kind of toxic, and you don't want to be getting those on your skin. So having a good pair of rubber gloves, or latex gloves I should say, or nitrile if you're allergic to latex, are really handy, and I always wear these when I'm doing the actual painting. And as long as you don't get them too goopy, you can always just wipe them off with paper towel and then reuse them. So they can go a long way, and a box of these gloves is only about, well, I think I paid about $15 for a box of 100 pairs at our local hardware store. So these are great. If you're doing a lot of fluid painting where you're using a blow dryer to move paint around, which some people do, if the more fluid your paint is, the more chance you have of making a big mess, which is what I also did the other night, is I made a nice big mess. And so if you're worried about it getting in your eyes, safety goggles are always a good thing. And always work in a well ventilated area. And if your painting space is not well ventilated like mine, I'm in a basement, you should be wearing some kind of respirator if you're using heat on top of your paint. Like, always follow the manufacturer's safety instructions on the products that you're using, whether it's your pouring medium or your paint, and use the appropriate safety wear to make sure that you're not inhaling anything you shouldn't be inhaling and that sort of thing. So this you can get at your local safety supply store or Home Depot or Home Hardware or Rona, etc. And this is designed for spray paint. So it's for paint spray, solvents and pesticides and that sort of thing. So it'll filter out any nasties. And you tend to get a little bit of fumes created if you're using a heat gun or a torch. The paint itself is a plastic, and when heated it has different properties than it does when it's just by itself. So when you heat it, you can get, like, you'll smell it. You can smell the off-gassing, and you don't want to be inhaling that. So if you're using a heat gun or something like that, make sure that you are in a well-ventilated area or use an appropriate respirator. So, well, that brings me to my next thing, heat guns. The heat gun, this is from a kitchen supply store, and you just turn it on, turn it off, and you basically just run it carefully, not too close, over your paint. You don't want to scorch it. And it's used basically to pop air bubbles. And if you're using silicone in your pores, it will heat the paint a little bit, like warm it up, so that the silicone will tend to rise towards the top. So it helps in cell production. And this is just refillable. You can get a can of butane from your local hardware store, and the butane refills you can use to refill these, and they're great. You can get all sorts of different models. I know Art Resin has a nice one, and some of them are like a one-touch one, so you have a little trigger here to turn it on, whereas this one here I actually have to pull it down to light it, so it's kind of a two-hand one, but does what I need it to do, so that's all good. Or you can use a heat gun, which you can find at your local hardware store. They're typically used for removing paint, but you can use it to heat and to move paint around, or a hairdryer. But be aware that if you're using a hairdryer, it has much more air volume that's being moved, and it may actually move your design. So I wouldn't necessarily use a hairdryer if you just want the heat. So there's that. But a hairdryer is something that most of us have in our own homes, so that's not something that you would have to physically go out and buy. One thing that you do have in your home is handy for painting is toothpicks. So these toothpicks are great to use if you can get it out of the container. The little sharp edge you can use to draw designs in your paint to move things around. You can also use the sharp end to pick little things out of your paint. I have a cat and a dog, and just about everything I own is covered in cat hair. That includes my paint. So when I'm painting, I always use the wet paint and move around on an angle in the light to see, and you can see any imperfections on the surface, and you can use the toothpick to pick them off. Another thing that you can use is a pair of tweezers. They work really great if you want a little bit more precision to be able to pick something off very carefully without ruining a design or a cell formation or something like that. So tweezers are handy to have. Most people have those in their bathroom. If you have fancy nails, not like mine, you might have one of these in your little toolkit at home. This is a daughter that they use for doing like acrylic nails and nail design. You can also get these at your local dollar store or beauty supply store. And these are great for doing designs in paint. You can pick things out with them. They're kind of a multi-purpose, multifunctional tool. Another thing that you might have kicking around your house I find is a really fun tool to have in your painting toolkit is a straw. This straw was just from a drink that I had bought somewhere, and you wash it out, and you can use the straw to blow in it to move your paint around and create all kinds of fun effects and designs. So a straw is a really handy and very inexpensive tool to have in your painting toolkit. Another thing that you might want to have kicking around is a spray bottle. Spray bottles are super handy. You can use them for spritzing the alcohol. You can use them for keeping water in it, so you can spritz the back of your canvas painting. When you get your canvas and you go to paint, you want it to be as firm and tight as possible. And most of these ones that you get in the value packs from like Michael's, they're not super fabulous. So sometimes you'll take the spray bottle and you'll give it a couple of spritzes on the back to dampen it, and then let it dry, and that will naturally tighten the fibers. So it'll tighten your surface for you. So that's a handy thing to have, and most of us have something like this kicking around home that we can abscond with and add to your painting equipment list. A couple of other things that you may want to have that are fairly easy to find are some basic tools to achieve certain effects. So you've got a whole bunch of different options, and you can buy them in all sorts of different places or find them in your home. Sorry about that, you got my head. This here is a plastic tray that came with a Frankenfood freezer lunch. I cut the tray in half, and I use this now for painting ribbons. So you can pour your paint into the tray, and then you can pour it across your surface, and it's got a nice clean edge for the paint to flow over, and you can make lovely ribbons. So this is a nice free, very easy to use piece of equipment that you can add to your equipment list. This is also another fun one that you can achieve some really cool effects with. It's a sink strainer. Now, if you do a search on YouTube, you'll find a ton of videos featuring sink strainers. There's a whole bunch of different ones that you can find out there. They have different patterns for the holes in them, will achieve different effects. Try the one that you've got at home and see how it works. Sink strainers are fun to work with. So this is something that you may already have kicking around in your kitchen. So you don't need to go and spend a lot of money to make some really cool effects in your painting. Sorry about all the creaking. You can see people upstairs. This you may already have if you've done any home repair. They're just basically little trowels that you can buy, or adhesive spreaders is this one, at your local hardware store. This one's got a nice flat edge. You can use it for swiping. You can use it for spreading paint. If you've done a pour and you absolutely hate it, you can use it to scrape all the paint off, which I have done many a time. So these are super handy. And this one, you can take it and draw it across your surface of your paint to create all these little effects with the little teeth. There's no limit to what you can do, and there's all sorts of things that you can find in your local home toolbox or toolkit or your junk drawer that can be great to use in acrylic painting. It's really, the sky's the limit. Some other things that I found that are fun to use. This is a cake decorating tool, actually, and stuff like this can be used to swipe with on your painting, and it gives you really neat effects. The only thing that you need to be cognizant of with this is that it's not flexible. This does not bend or give. So when it's best to be used on a surface that's very taut or very flat, like a wood panel. If you're using it on a canvas and your canvas isn't tight, you may get it connecting with your canvas on the ends closest to where the frame of the canvas board is. And then if your canvas is sagging at all, it won't have contact in the middle, so then you get this gap. But it's something to play with anyway. If you have cake decorating tools at home, it's worth giving it a whirl. But again, be careful with using stuff on paint and then going back to food. So just keep that in mind. Kind of once it becomes a paint tool, it's a paint tool. These you can get at your local art supply store. They have a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes. These are two that I find are kind of fun. I just picked them up, so I haven't had a chance to play too much with them. But stuff like this, they're really not all that expensive, a couple of dollars, and you can have a lot of fun with them. So you can use these for moving paint around and creating designs and that sort of thing. So something like that. This is probably going to be your best bet. These are just a couple of the different styles of palette knives that you can get at your local art supply store, although I would recommend going to the dollar store because they generally have these at the dollar store in a pack of 5 or 6, and they have like 5 or 6 different styles, and they're only like $1 or $2, and they're super cheap but super functional. They're great for doing swipes. They're great for moving paint around. They're great for when you've painted on your canvas and you're finished, but you've got all these drips that are dripping off the bottom. So you can just run it along the bottom and scrape all of those little drippies off without getting your hands all filthy. So these are super functional and super handy and really cheap. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money. If you want to get a little higher quality tool, you can go to your local art supply store and get a metal one with a nice wood handle. They've got all sorts of different shapes and sizes for different techniques and painting. So, you know, if you want to spend the money, go ahead, but you don't have to. You can spend as little or as much as you want. And this one here is actually kind of fun. I've used this a couple times to do swipes, and it's actually a silicone pad, and this is like a makeup brush. So I guess they use it to apply makeup. I'm not sure exactly how, but anyway, found it in the makeup section at the beauty supply store. So this one here is great for doing swipes. So you can just pull it across the surface of your paint, and it's a nice, soft, flexible surface. So this one works really well. You may even have one of these at home that you want to give it a whirl. So something like that is great. Another thing that you might want to use is a pip or a pipette. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. This one, my cat chewed it, so I have taped it so that it still has air suction. Still works. But you can use these to use water to drip into your paint mix as you're mixing it. So you can add controlled amounts, or you can even use it to drip like into your paint and do drops on your surface. You know, kind of the sky's the limit. So those are just some of the basic tools that you may find that you have around your house to kind of get you started. Like I say, you don't need to spend a whole lot. The dollar store can be your best friend. And feel free to, you know, rummage through your husband's toolkit. You might find a whole bunch of stuff, or your own toolkit. You might find a bunch of stuff in there that you'll be able to use and get started with some acrylic pouring. So anyway, that's about it for this video. If you like it, give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified about future videos. I'm going to have a whole series of how-to videos talking about paint ratios, types of paint, different pouring techniques, all that kind of stuff coming up in the next few weeks. So find me on Facebook, MCI Designs, Instagram, and check out our Facebook group, Acrylic Pouring and Fluid Art Canada, and join the conversation. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.